let's get the show underway. Hi everyone, and welcome to the webinar. On behalf of Digistor and our guest panelists today, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedules to be with us. My name is Mark Richards and I'm the marketing manager for Digistor. The virtual conference is jam-packed with information for you today, but before we get underway, I just wanted to cover up a couple of items of housekeeping so you can get the most out of the webinar. First off, Q&A. Throughout the webinar, we encourage you to submit questions via the Q&A. Click the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window on your screen and type your questions. Please use the Q&A button, not the chat function. At the appropriate time, one of our panelists will answer either verbally or by typing an answer. Once the question's answered, it'll be viewable by all the participants. If we don't get to any of the questions during the presentation, we'll get to them at the panel session at the end. Questions are also recorded, so we'll get back to you directly after the conference for any questions not addressed or needing further follow-up. In order for you to get the best experience for video playback, some of our presenters may send you a link via the chat window, so you can click the link and view the video outside of Zoom webinar. Look out for notifications on the chat button at the bottom of the screen. If everything works as planned, we'll also be recording the webinar, and a link to the view on demand will be sent to everyone once we've prepared and uploaded the video. So first off, let me introduce Digistor. This year marks Digistor's 30th year in business. In the beginning, we worked with video production and broadcast professionals to utilize new and emerging technologies to achieve their production goals. Over time, and as Digistor's size, skills and expertise and vendor relationships have expanded, we now address a wide range of application areas across many industries. I've summarized here some of the solution areas we address relevant to the audience attending today. I'd encourage you to get in touch with us to discuss any technology or technical service related questions you have, whether it's how do I optimize our Autodesk software subscriptions, or what's the best way to implement cloud rendering for us, or anything else. We're here to help. A particular note, currently, we've just set up a remote technologies testbed where you can connect and test remote access to a virtualized high-end HP workstation in our Sydney headquarters. We're using Teradigi remote software for the connection, and we've pre-installed software from Adobe, Avid, Blackmagic, Autodesk to play with. It's available now to try, so contact us if you want to book and check it out. In today's conference, we're looking at the technologies around some of the solutions shown here on the slide and sharing insights from the customers that utilize those technologies. We work with a range of leading vendors. Our close working relationship with vendor partners like Autodesk means that we can utilize their staff and resources to work with us on solutions for your needs. Here are just a few relevant vendors we work with. We've got a great lineup today, and we've arranged the agenda so that it alternates between technology presenters and customer presenters. I've included session times here, so take a screenshot if you need to. You might want to note these down in case you need to drop in and out for any reason, or you want to make sure you don't miss anything of interest to you. Of course, we can't answer all the questions or address all the application areas specific to each of you in this conference. So I'd encourage you to contact your Digistor account manager or Digistor generally so that we can help you out further. Here are our main contact and communication channel details, but you'll also have my email address from your webinar registration and reminder emails, so feel free to contact me directly at any time. Okay, let's get the show on the road. In a moment, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Andrei Dolnikov from Binyan. Andrei is an interior architect and founder of Binyan, a leading architectural and 3D rendering and animation studio, specializing in the creation of bespoke, considered and memorable architecture films and images. He started the business in Sydney from his living room after working as a visualizer in the US, and has since guided Binyan to become a leader in the field. The team of 120 plus artists and producers are currently working on projects all over the globe from 4 studios in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and New York. Andrei has built a team of world-class artists who work together to bring originality and sophistication to their clients' projects. Welcome, Andrei. Feel free to steal the screen at any time.
Hello. Can everybody see and hear me? Yeah?
We can see and hear you.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, people that I cannot see, I'm in my little office out the front of at the front of my house. A child may burst in at any moment, but I haven't rehearsed any of that to occur. So if it happens, you're getting a real insight into the mayhem-like lifestyle that I'm leading right now. I have a short presentation. Just wanted to share with you some of our thoughts about how we work and how we think about our work. I'm probably one of the less technical presenters in terms of what I'm going to be covering. So it's great to be on this esteemed panel, of course, with my colleagues such as Daniel and Ben from the world of making ArcViz and all the Autodesk and Digistor guys who support us in what we do. So it's really good to be here. No idea, I'm not used to, I actually haven't done one like this before. So I'm used to seeing people's faces and get a bit of a vibe. So we'll see how it goes. I'll just have to imagine it. I like to watch a lot of late night US talk shows, and some of them have a laugh track. I should have had a laugh track for this, like, just now. Okay, awkward. All right, so I'll just, here, I'm gonna share my screen. And the thing is, I couldn't get this, like, for some reason, my computer only shows me my screen. Anyway, I can't see you when I'm doing it, but doesn't matter. Okay, this will stop others sharing. Okay, here I go. I'm gonna share. Where is it? What happened to it? Sorry. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
You only see one slide, right?
We're seeing 2 slides.
2 slides. Okay, cool. Okay, I guess this keynote is. Hold on a second. I know how to fix that. What about now?
Yep, we're seeing the 1 slide.
1 slide? Okay, beautiful. Okay, so I'll just talk about how we think about our work, and it's very short time. I'm going to go through a few things, show one animation link that I thought to share with you, and a little bit of a glimpse into our show reel, which we've been painstakingly working away at for ages, and now it's finally almost ready. But some of the things are not quite live yet, so I'll just give you a bit of a teaser on that. So, I'm talking about the tools, obviously, are incredible. We are supported to such a large extent with things that used to take, hundreds of clicks now happen at the click of a button. But I have learned, I'm sure those that in the industry will agree, that it's really about how you use the tools and the thinking that you bring to it. And I just want to talk a little bit about how we do that. So this is a quote that I love, that one machine could do the work of 50 ordinary men, but no machine can do the work of one extraordinary man. Okay, this is before woke, so it says men and man, but I'm quoting it as it is. For me, that's absolutely what I look for when I'm talking to my artists or recruiting someone or kind of thinking about the work. Is there a spark of the extraordinary that can bring something unique to the image? And technology and the magic that it can produce is really a kind of a symbiotic relationship, that if the technology is used in the right way, then what comes out of it is way beyond the you're not wondering about, you're not marveling at the technological feat, but rather at how could this be possible in almost more of like a spiritual sense. And composition, which I'll get to in a second. Sometimes what makes a great image isn't the plugins and the tools, so they need to be there. But in a sense, the more advanced they are, the more they kind of disappear and get out of the way. And it's really then becomes the artist is interacting with the subject matter in a pure way, as though Like when I used to play, actually just now in lockdown started playing saxophone again, but I used to play a lot. And the greatest musicians, when they're holding the saxophone, and for them, it's a very complicated machine that they're pressing the buttons on. But when they play it, it's them who are playing it. It's their soul that's coming through the instrument. And that's the most beautiful thing to see. And I think we can do the same thing in our art to some extent. Okay, just very briefly about me, blah, blah, blah. Started the company about 10 years ago now. Now I'm a veteran. I used to be an upstart. Have 4 now not so little kids. I'm more gray and bold than in that photo. My wife still looks exactly the same, of course. Still married. 15 years, baby. I got this. I got this whole marriage and parenting thing down. I'm really good at it. That's the team at once upon a time. Teams changed a lot and got quite a lot bigger. But we have a very, diverse from all over the world, literally, and, kind of a lot of voices. And sometimes it's a bit hard to herd all the cats and try to get a decision made, but I kind of like it that way. So it works for us. And for us, the objective always is, like right now, people are asking me, what's happening with VR, with all these kind of new technology people need now from in a remote environment. My first question is always, are we telling a story or are we just trying to achieve simulation? Obviously different companies have different objectives, but for us, it has to be story first, and then the technology needs to be there to support that. And we're going to look at several principles that are fundamental to the way we create an image, a piece of immersive content, film, animation, and I'll just briefly take you through those principles that we look at, and I'll show you some of our work along the way. So number one, and it really is number one because that's where it all starts, is composition. Like if you don't get composition right, the image can be have the most beautiful textures, the most detailed modeling, but it doesn't do anything, and then what's the point? So there's some few examples of less is more, and we explore a lot in wireframe, and sometimes these days we're doing like color, like kind of wireframes, but they're actually in full color as well. And we spend a lot of time exploring this, sometimes hours and days, painstakingly to make sure our clients understand why we've arrived at what we propose to be the strongest composition. So, and through that, you can see here, obviously less is more, showing a lot of the room, but this ended up being like the hero shot almost of certainly of the interiors of this project. Here's another abstracted detail of, they didn't even ask for this. Oftentimes we will just do this, and then hopefully the clients end up paying for it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but this is the one that gets the most thrills from our team as well, and that's very important to me as well. Finding, unique angles. I'm going to go quickly here. So after composition, the most important thing is definitely climate and lighting. And this is a great quote: the right light at the right time, everything is extraordinary. So often we're challenged that the subject matter we're portraying might not be inherently extraordinary. And I think it's our job to try to make it so through lighting, and climate is so key to that. So be it, this shot here, it's another pool shot, but the sort of the light being brought into that space and creating a certain level of interest and depth in the water is very, very important. Here's a couple of images, the same shot, but we try to do a day and night version. The client was all about it, but it's without that kind of, each story tells a different image tells a very different story here. The way you would use a space at night, this thing that's happening is tells you about the lifestyle of the person could be occupying that space. Again, dark. We're getting a lot more into dark images these days, which I quite love, even though I was resistant at first. They make me happy sometimes, somehow. They're trying to please everybody. Then, in our work, the randomness that we have to introduce into the images that the computer maybe by itself doesn't deliver is absolutely paramount. So the condensation, for example, on that sauna, as you can see in the back of that image. So again, subject matter may be mundane, but we have to pierce it to find that something marvelous in the image. Detail, depth of field, randomness of planting and nature, super important. Here, I don't know, something about this shot that makes me want to look at that foreground bench thing in the gym. I don't know, for some reason, it's just telling me to, and when I look at it, a whole world of associations and imagination opens up for me, and that's what we want the viewer to have as well. We're not really showing much. We're showing a couple of bloody punching bags and a drink bottle, but we want this image to convey the essence of the space, and that's really what it's all about. It's a project in London, which one of our first ones, which I'm really happy about. So again, the little corner, the imperfections of the paint, and that this is a brutalist building that's been repurposed into these like hipster apartments. Kind of the imperfection of the wall and these little details is really what makes it work. Here again, it is a project in Jakarta, but the styling and of course, you know, the natural feel of the fabrics, you know, not trying to be almost too perfect. I think that's very important. And flowing on from styling, it's again one of the important elements in making sure that the image is communicating to your audience. So in most of these, we did the styling ourselves, oftentimes interior designer, but in many projects we do that ourselves. So I'll just flick through here. This one is a class, it's an old one, but I thought I'd leave it in. You know, this is about, the client was super excited about having a Maserati lift. So we thought, it's Maserati in the image. And this one got heaps of free press. You know, difference between an LA hipster and a Jersey City looking at New York hipster. So the styling is related different. The tone, that's West Coast LA lighting. This is, you know, East lighting. Very important to get that locality of the feel of spot on. This is another one which I just love, this little detail shot. If a project in the whole story here, you can talk about the brand at more time. And, you know, finally, narrative and concept. And I'll give you a bit of a glimpse. How am I doing for time, Mark? Because have not been keeping time. How long do I have? Okay, just keep going there. So I'll just show a few shots from our upcoming show reel. You know, narrative and concept is becoming a more and more core feature of our work, and that extends. So it's not just stills or film or animation. We're trying to blur the boundaries between those things. So that could be, and now these are. Okay, 1 second. You have another 7 minutes. Okay, I went really fast. Okay, I'll talk a little bit more about this then. So ultimately, again, so technology is there to help us tell a story. That's our objective. So what that means, for example, in animation, you know, introducing 2D into 3D and making sure that the viewer is kind of taken into the story without just thinking, oh, it looks photorealistic. Rather, they're thinking about, you know, the meaning of the work itself. And I've seen that also in what Daniel and his team are doing, which looks pretty amazing. So, you know, immersive experiences where we're bringing a lot more animation skill sets and technology into regular, so to speak, ArcViz. Projection mapping. This is just a shot from a project we did in Saudi, which is that's a whole world that we modeled, and it's a whole basically mega production, probably the biggest production we've ever done. That's all CG, that shot there. A lot of 2D you know, apps, and how you're already taking the asset, the content we create, bringing into the hands of the viewer. You know, a live action integration of, you know, green screen and how that interacts with live action, set environments, CG integration, and so forth. We're doing more and more yachts and special effects stuff, automotive. So, you know, stuff that's not strictly speaking, doesn't really have anything to do with architecture, but is enabling, is using the same tools that we use for the normal work we do, but in a more illustrative way. And a couple more here. So you can see, you know, it has a link to architecture. It's still using that soup that we swim in, but it's bringing an influence from product launch, from automotive, from, you know, TV commercials, music videos. That's what we're kind of drawing inspiration from. So that's the end of the slides. I think I must have another. I'll show you now. So I'll stop sharing my screen. How do I do that? Okay, can you see me back now? Yeah. So, you know, that's a really glimpse. It's like a presentation that sometimes I talk about for an hour, give it condensed into 10 minutes. I'll send you a link now very quickly of an animation. Just wanted to show you a kind of a finished, a recently launched one. It's funny, some of the ones I wanted to show are not live, so couldn't do it in this format. Okay, I'm going to put it into the chat. And chat. Okay, there is all, I'll go all panelists and attendees as Mark has taught us. Okay, so if you can just all please play this, this link. It's a project called Bennett's Lane, which I'm very excited about. Project in Melbourne. It's got a whole history in terms of there was a jazz club on that site. I'm a crazy jazz fan myself as well, so I got more involved than most projects in this one. Not that what happened is because I just was involved in making a nuisance of myself, but it's got a, you know, a real story that's not just superimposed, but rather it's part of the inherent history of the site. The building itself looks kind of like a musical instrument. Some people say like a saxophone or a guitar or an organ, and we took that idea and brought it into the project itself. So please play that link, and I'll just mute myself for a minute. Okay, I think it must have finished by now. Yeah? Or not? Did it finish for everybody playing it? Just give a thumbs up. Yes, no, maybe. Okay, I'm going to assume it has. So that's, yeah. So look, I think I'm almost at the end of my time. I don't know why this one kind of struck a chord with people in terms of like the positive feedback. I guess because it's got the information, it's got the story, but I think, you know, even the kind of music that we chose, like so much, if not for them, that wouldn't work at all. So some of these things that we sometimes don't think about, whether the music can be, okay, it just needs to sound cool, but this needs to sound appropriate to the place. It's jazz, but it's like traditional jazz. It, pun intended, with the edit and integrating all those elements so that, funnily enough, developers, I think, like the fact that it's got lots of stats and all that stuff. But, the building itself is an exciting looking building, and I think we managed to show it in an exciting way. So, that's an example of kind of a lot of those things coming together in terms of, composition, narrative, story. And I think no matter what technology we use, folks, and it's amazing, those are things that has to be at the forefront of our mind if we want to make, I think, art that means something. I know it's commercial art, we're not Picasso's here, but I want to be going to work and feeling that I've achieved something that moves me and my audience in some ways. And some days we achieve that, some days not, but that's kind of what we're striving for. So it's been really good to share my thoughts, musings, and ideas with you today. I think I'll finish there, and thank you very much. Do we do questions, or that's for later, right?
Yeah, we might save it to although it is one question that's directly about that clip, Andrei, which is how long did it take you to do? Do you want to answer that live? Yeah,
I can answer it. I mean, there's no simple answer, because there was weeks and weeks of pre-production and planning, and we did a live action shoot, which some aspects we used, some didn't. I mean, technically speaking, it was probably 3 weeks of production after the still CGIs were completed, but there was a lot of pre-production that went for weeks on before that. So it's a good few weeks to make that work. And of course, working on all the CG and work for the still images was another 4 or 5 weeks prior to that. Probably doesn't answer your question there, but.
Thanks, Andrei. That was great. We'll move on to the next presentation now. Next, we have Sam Macalister from Autodesk. Sam, let me close my screens here. Sam's an architect and BIM solutions engineer for the architecture, engineering, construction team at Autodesk. His focus is on building design workflows for design and construction using Autodesk building information modeling and cloud computing technology. He has a passion for visual communication to improve design and development and construction coordination. Prior to joining Autodesk, Sam worked in the design and construction industry as an architect in London for international firms BDP and HOK. He's a regular speaker at Autodesk University Vegas and also teaches digital design construction workflows at UTS. I'd like to welcome Sam.
Thanks, Mark. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Has that come through okay?
Yes, it has.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to do half an hour on architectural design visualization. I'm a technical solutions specialist working from Autodesk, and my passion or my hobby is visualization, amongst the other 42 products that we need to evangelize. So within the 30 minutes that we get to present today, I'm going to try and cover 3 parts. One is working with our conceptual design applications. Number 2 is looking at how to use BIM data with 3ds Max or whatever 3D visualization tool you choose to use. And then finally finish up with one of our tools that's in the collection called Navisworks for big BIM data management. So to kick off, we're going to be looking at Format, which is our conceptual design tool. Has a lot of similar functionality to tools like SketchUp. Then move into our hero tool, which is Revit. Basically, if you're not familiar with building information modeling, a majority of buildings projects here and around the world typically use Revit to create building information modeling. And then I'm going to finish up with, for big BIM data, Navisworks. And Navisworks is an application that's been around for a while. It was originally used for handling really large data sets. And what it does is it condenses a cache copy of the file down to a smaller file format, which you can control and manipulate, and then export out as an FBX file format. Just to note, all of these tools are provided in the AEC collections. So with Format, Revit, and Navisworks, and 3ds Max, you get pretty good bang for buck for design visualization, authoring tools, and visualization tools like 3ds Max. So to begin with, Format, we've had this around for a while. It was originally developed by Autodesk, and now it's included inside the collections. For each section, we're going to just do an overview of what it is, just show you some quick videos, why you should use it and when you should use it. So on the screen here, this is Format. It's a push-pull extrude application. It's incredibly intuitive to use. This is just a quick, simple model that I'm putting together on Tadeo Ando's Church of Light. So whether you choose to use the push-pull technology or you want to draw polylines and sweep, you can draw on faces, you can extrude, you can boolean, you can do offsets. All the typical modeling tools you'd find in any basic modeling application can be done using Format. Again, you can use this very quickly, you can dimension it. You can also get into a lot of detail should you want to. It has a material editing library. You can bring in other file formats, and you can basically knock up a conceptual model intuitively within a short amount of time. Other things it does is it allows you to work with Revit family data. So if you're a SketchUp user or you use SketchUp resources from the Google warehouse, there's a large database there. However, if you're working with BIM data and you're working with architects who may want to use particular Revit families, you can bring these into Format as well. So what we can do here is we can navigate to our chosen Revit family database and go through and convert all these objects, all these furnishings, particular furnishings, particularly for Tadeo Ando's Church of Light, into assets that we can use inside of Format. So here we have a particular modeled bench that's very bespoke to this design, and we can bring this into the Format environment from the Revit database. Other things is that Format plays nice with SketchUp and other file formats. So SAT, STL files, OBJ files, these can all be imported into Format and reused. What's interesting with the SketchUp files here is that they can be imported in, and it comes in like an FBX file. So we'll come in with the geometry and also the texture mapping, and it will group the information. So here we have some SKP file formats, and they're small file sizes. We can bring them into our Format environment, and when they load in this case, we just want people. So Natalie Portman and her boyfriend walking a dog. This comes in with that full texture map, and you can see over there on the right, it's grouped with layers. So even if you have a large SketchUp database, but you want to try and work with Format, but reuse that SketchUp database, this can all be imported into the Format environment. You can work with the Revit families. You can use this in a very intuitive manner and work up your conceptual designs. Other things to note here, if you're doing those original sketch design models that you want to show a client before you get into textures, you just want to make it look schematic. You've got all these nice old school styles here. For anybody who was an architect who used to work on the drawing board with blue pencil, you can add that. You can also do your ambient occlusion looking models here as well. It does also have an animation tool. So again, if you're just working at the very early stages with a client and you want to set up some cameras around the building and then link those paths together, you can do this very easily inside of Format. You just save those views, and then you can preview an animation around that building and see how it's going to look in a very conceptual draft mode. And then finally, once you've gone through this conceptual design phase, you can export out the file or the graphic in numerous file formats. So FBX, of course, will hold a lot of information. I think we now have 3DS file formats, and DAE file format. So a lot of this conceptual data, you don't throw it away. It will come through clean into applications like 3ds Max, or you can use it inside of Revit. So going to move into working with BIM data. This is a Revit model, and this is linked into 3ds Max. There's numerous applications that you can use. The one that I don't use is Photoshop. I actually use the free cloud version of Autodesk Pixlr for doing post-production. I just don't have a Photoshop license. And I know that can be very heavy in simple workflows for post-production. What I do use is my preferred rendering engine is V-Ray. I use Forest Pack for vegetation. And I've been getting into substance materials. That's got a fantastic database for architectural materials and customization. Also other assets like the people from a company called Render People. I try and put everything in the model as opposed to spending an extra day or two trying to do post-production or After Effects type work. So with Revit, I want to talk about what it is, why you should use it, when you should use it. So it's an authoring tool for building information modeling. Years ago, we did have what was called the building design suites with the suite workflows. This is basically just exporting the data out as a FBX file and bringing it into 3ds Max. Now we have a direct link from 3ds Max to bring in that Revit file, and it will come in really cleanly. You can control the smoothing of groups and the curve parameters in the models. One thing that you can do here with Revit as a tip, if you're working with really large data sets, like you might be working with a large tower or a combined shopping mall, for example, you don't want to be bringing in the whole model all as one. You can go into Revit and you can save out views and control what's in that view, and then export out the information individually. So you've got better control of it within 3ds Max. It also does come into 3ds Max clean, and it breaks it down into categories and Revit file types as well. This is just another way to help you manage that BIM data before you take it into your visualization software. So this is just a screen grab of the 3ds Max import now. So you can link in Revit files, FBX, and AutoCAD. When you link in that Revit file, there's different ways to bring it in. You can bring across the lighting, the daylight system, the camera. You can auto smooth adjacent faces. You can also adjust some of these settings and customize them for your preferred workflows. And then as you develop it, let's say at the last minute, the architect changes the design, changes the Revit model, you can always relink that information in with the latest data. You don't have to rebuild it or ask for more time or work all night to get that job done. So this is just a few options here, and this comes down to user preference. Some people like to use combining the model by Revit material. So when you bring it in that way, it's going to have a whole lot of multi-submat materials, and that may be easier to manage it, can sometimes be quicker, especially when you're using certain types of graphics cards. My personal preference is to bring it in by family type, so I can sort of control it a bit more freely within the 3ds Max environment. And what I always try and do is, once I'm set up in Max with my chosen rendering engine, I go to make sure that when I relink it, I turn off the lights in the daylight system. If you keep these things chosen, it will override your 3ds Max rendering engine. So the only thing I'd recommend is maybe bringing in cameras. If the architect says, I want to have this particular view from the client's bedroom or something, you can bring that information in. And what's really cool is you can control the curved object detail here as well. So the meshing data can sometimes get really big. You don't need all the information. So there's a great little feature here to actually control the data that you're going to be bringing in. Other things to note is you want to keep the 3ds Max material parameters and assignments on reload. If you don't do this, it will overwrite them from Revit. So a couple of little tips there in terms of managing the data. Other things that I personally like to do, again, if you're working with cameras that are coming from Revit, you can match the settings inside of the output size. So in Revit, you can set up that 1280 by 720 for the HDTV video aspect ratio. I just like to keep that consistent because sometimes you can do all the stuff in Revit and it can be very customized in terms of the window, but in 3ds Max, we want to work with some of the traditional output sizes. These are other tips depending on your preferred workflow. So you can do it as singular elements or you can link it. Sometimes though, it may choose to be better to bind the information. Sometimes keeping that link can get very complex and it depends on the size of the project and the complexity, but you can choose to bind it and just keep it there in the model and break that link if that's better for your particular workflow. Other great features inside of 3ds Max, which reads the data and helps you optimize the data, are really cool. Like when the data comes in from Revit, it's all categorized here. So it knows what it is. It will list it out for you. You don't need to rename anything. It has the family Revit information here, so you can sort of find it and group it and categorize it. So it's a really nice way of Autodesk software talking to each other. There's other fun tools I really like the Pro Optimizer, especially with really large data from Revit. You can use that Pro Optimizer and then calculate it and reduce the amount of information that's embedded within that model. And then, of course, be able to use the UVW mapping. Sometimes in Revit, that's not the best tool to do it. So inside of Max, these are some of the tools that just really help with optimizing that workflow. Okay, so I got 13 minutes, so staying a little bit ahead of time here. I'm going to move into Big BIM, and this may be the product that you're not familiar with. It's called Navisworks. Originally, we acquired it from Jetstream Technologies in the UK back in the early 2000s. This is actually a Navisworks render. It does have a cloud rendering engine. So even if you're working with these large data sets and just want to orientate yourself around them and render them, you can do it inside of Navisworks if you want to. You can customize the materials. It's got all the material libraries that work across Autodesk applications. So just going to go over what it is, why you should use it, when you should use it. So what I really like about Navisworks is you can bring in enormous files and optimize the cache file format. So they have things called NWCs, Navisworks cache files. You can combine them as a Navisworks or NWD or an NWF. Federated models. The great thing is if you get like an architect's model or a model which is like 2 gig, you can compress it down to maybe 400 megs inside of Navisworks. So if you're struggling to open it, you can bring it into Navisworks first, check it, export out the information you need, optimize it in the FBX options here. You can actually go and do polygon limiting, and you can reduce the polygon count here as well, take out the textures and the lights. So this is a really powerful application that can help you with your prepping of BIM data. The other great thing is it will read up to 56 different file formats. And these aren't Autodesk formats. We play nice with CATIA, Pro Engineer, SolidWorks, SketchUp. All of these file formats can be loaded into Navisworks. You can review them, prep them, organize them, then bring them into Max. A couple of things I want to highlight here. It does have an animation tool. So let's say you're just wanting to work out some storytelling, do some storyboarding. Maybe you're not ready to go into Max, you just want to do it on Navisworks first. You can bring in your 3ds Max assets here, really detailed ones, and do some basic animations. So here I'm merging a crane tower with its boom. I can bring this in, it's an FBX file. So I've got the crane base and the crane boom just broken down into 2 separate groups here. I can go to the simple tools, which is rotate, scale, move, pretty simple stuff. And I can start to set up the center point of where I want this boom to pivot. I can do this in plan. Again, it's a very intuitive way to do an animation. Then I go to the animator application here inside of Navisworks, and I'm just creating some points here on the timeline. So here I have a quick video where I just created a couple of points, like a 10 or 20-second animation. And inside of that crane boom, I've added a camera. I want the camera to move along the roof of this building as the crane is rotating. And very simply, I've got the starting point of an animation without having to go into too much effort. Again, this is just a screen capture, but it could be a handy way if you've got a much bigger project. Maybe you're even doing work for a construction company. They're hungry for visualization professionals to do this type of work. You could get this data from the contractor, bring it into Navisworks, and start to work out your storytelling or your sequence of animations inside of Navisworks with all these heavy assets before you bring it into Max and then go through the rendering and the post-production, etc. So this is a really a handy tool inside of Navis to use for your animations. You can export these out as well. So AVI file format. There's a few other codecs in here. And again, you can start to customize your aspect ratio, your frames per second, the anti-aliasing for the edges goes up to about 8. It's about as high as it gets. It's not going to be photoreal, but it will give you a nice simple output like you're seeing on the screen here. So nothing spectacular, but it's enough to quickly show a draft of that camera tracking along the roof and the crane boom moving around to drop off an asset inside of that construction site. Other cool things you can do if you want to get into detail, if you're bringing in things like advanced steel, this is a quick one, like an assembly detail. Maybe a contractor wants to show that they know how the building's going to go together. So you can grab all the nuts and the bolts that come within that advanced steel package, give them a time frame here, and then have that camera pan up and then show those bolts assembling. The last little bit here that I want to add is the simplest way to do an animation in Navisworks is with a contractor's program. So you have this tool that will allow you to do a timeline of events. And a contractor, when they go to do the project, they're going to be excavating the ground, putting in piles, pile caps, floors, etc., etc. You can get their construction program and you can bring it into Navisworks and sync it to the geometry. And there are tools in here to automate it. So you can group everything, organize it, and then link it to that construction program and then do an animation of the building being assembled. There are third-party tools or scripts to actually take this out to 3ds Max as well, should you want to do this. But again, this is another powerful way to intuitively set up a construction sequence of events for an animation of a building, and then you just hit play. And here we have the piles of the pile caps, the cores going up, and then the columns and the beams and the floors, etc. And this is all built off the contractor's construction program. So that's something that could be really handy again when you're working with heavy BIM data and you want to prep for your animations. Just to wrap up here, some of the tools or some of the assets that I like to use in the workflow that I'm really happy about using. This is from Substance. They've got a really cool database of materials for architecture here, numerous other different types of professions, but you can load these into your 3ds Max environment and then convert them to your chosen rendering engine. So it loads them in as a raw asset, and then you can convert them, whether it's V-Ray or Arnold or Scanline or whatever you want to use, it will set it up for you. So yeah, it's a fantastic way to create materials without having to go and build off from scratch. Another really handy site is Evermotion. You can buy bundles of scenes. Sometimes you don't have time to make a site. I've purchased a couple. You can buy them for like 140 euros, get like 8 different scenes. They even offer some free ones. This is one where it's part of their 15th anniversary collection. You can download this whole scene for free. It's a great little site to be able to work with. And they have numerous other ones. So if you ever having to create something or put something in a forest as a conceptual design, Evermotion's got some great assets here. Another thing that I'm really excited about, again, I've been using V-Ray. That's used very heavily in the architecture industry, but people use Corona, Arnold, numerous other rendering engines. They have just released V-Ray 5, which has a really cool material database and a whole new material engine, which is really exciting, and some cool post-production tools as well. As I mentioned, I'm not a Photoshop user. I don't have access, but this has post-production tools built into it. And then finally, to slowly wrap up here before we get into some Q&A, for heavy detailed sites, Forest Pro is just insane. It creates proxies, and you can just scatter meadows, leaves, stones. You can do your rugs with these tools. There is a light free version, but the guys at ITO Software have given me a demo license, and I just find this insane for doing the detailed stuff that you used to try and do with displacement or fur. So Forest Pro is pretty cool. Okay, so just to wrap up and summarize, so been over conceptual design, BIM data, and then big BIM data management, and the products that I've shown today from Autodesk that are included in the AEC collection is Autodesk Format, Revit, and Navisworks, and the data from these applications will all work with 3ds Max to help you with your design visualization workflows. Okay, and that's me with a couple of minutes to spare.
Thank you, Sam. It's always good to be a little bit ahead of time. All right, just let me steal the screen share from you again.
Sure.
Okay, next up we've got Dr. Ben Guy. Ben is the founder and CEO of Urban Circus, who have been delivering digital tools for the built environment for almost 2 decades. Urban Circus has started with a vision to digitally transform urban planning, has grown to include capabilities from interactive digital systems, 3D model, image and video production, advisory services, and strategic stakeholder workshops. Ben has an innate ability to take complex information and make it easy to understand and comprehend. So welcome, Ben. Please take over at your whim.
1 2 1 2 testing. All good. Hello. Hello from New Farm in Brisbane. I'm good, Mark. You can see me, and we're going to share screens on. I haven't got any thumbs up, so I'm assuming. Give me the thumbs up, Mark. Everything's good. Hey, thank you so much. Yes, thank you to the previous presenters. I will talk a little bit about how we came into being and what we're doing. The main point of Urban Circus, and when I got into my PhD, was really around helping society progress with good development. And I don't want to oppose against what Andrei is doing, because I think it's very important, and I've got a bit of artist jealousy. Thanks very much, Andrei. Some beautiful work in there. It's really fantastic. I became interested in city building, particularly when I lived in the UK for a few years, where we saw the post-war reconstruction efforts created a lot of efficiency and functionality, particularly around road engineering, and how that integrated with space to maximize the return on investment for cities. And sometimes we have great pieces of infrastructure, but sometimes they don't really work so well with the urban environment around maximizing that. So it's always been a philosophy of openness and transparency, and very much focused on what I call the woman in the street philosophy. We now run The major project approvals models across, I don't know, half of Australia in terms of population for Victoria, South Australia and Canberra in particular, where development assessments and discussions and conceptualization in these spaces come in really at the big end of town, usually, so $1 billion plus projects or 50,000 square meter type property developments is typical for us. And there'll be a lot of conversation around how, how it impacts and how it integrates, really focused on getting the approval and the economic value of this to the economy. And it's certainly been seen in Victoria is the compression of time it takes to get these approvals. That opportunity cost, if an approval takes 2 years, 3 years, which was typical, and now it takes 6 months, 8 months. That's great for everybody here because we all get to do more work quicker in terms of no matter where you are in the value chain. You could be in construction, you could be in art, you could be in interiors, you could be in utilities, anything. It all requires economic development. So there's the economic development piece and there's the quality piece, very much driven by, I'm a public space advocate, really. And good design is not much more expensive than bad design. It's about getting in there and being visible. We're running a lot of projects in Melbourne. So we've got maybe $100 billion worth of projects on the books. And we've probably done $250 billion, maybe more in project facilitation over this time, particularly across today. We'll talk about particularly the transport infrastructure and defense infrastructure spaces. That's why we exist. That's how we add value to the economy. That's how we help people grow. And these relationships we develop with clients tend to be very, very long relationships. We're very trusted, very private conversations. And we get into the inner sanctum and help a lot of projects come to market in that space. So what I thought I would do, I don't really want to do too many frills, is actually just show how it works. Exactly as Andrei says, it's not necessarily, I'm just going to play a video, and I was aware there was a little bit of clunkiness with some of the slideshows before. Mark, you suggested stopping my video, my face video, and maybe that makes the internet go faster from Brisbane to the rest of the world. I'm not quite sure. So here we are in a typical space, and we are very aware of and love where massive Autodesk users ourselves and Digistore users. Thanks very much, Mark, for your good infrastructure. In this space, we find, so this is one scenario. We're doing shadows here, as you can see, just testing that out. What we've got is a fairly large piece of environment. And even though, so this is our particular software, we call it the Urban Engine. Yeah, it's an approvals engine. And even though BIM and Navisworks and the Bentley products and obviously SketchUp are in the world that we are working, we work with a lot of very large consultancy firms, design engineering firms. Our ability to bring this together, both in a timely fashion and inform the design process, like we could all have a little opinion on this bus shelter here of like, is that really a wise place to get the bus design and the building design and the rail design integrated? I'm quite proud to say that over our time, we have potentially saved a lot of, let's say, bad things. So I think there's a tactic in urban design called passive surveillance, which is about, you don't necessarily need police and CCTV cameras, even though they're very popular now. When you have well-designed space, you have eyeballs looking at each other, and you're always sort of in view. And I'll just go back to this view a little bit and talk about that. Then it's a safe place to be. And we've done a lot of interfaces between rail and the urban environment and found a lot of situations where women could get in some trouble through the engineering design and just facilitated that. We're very proud of that contribution. A new space we're moving into, we really love, is in this, we call it familiarization or training. And now I've actually got a bunch of guys who are driving trains. Everything here is geometrically accurate. So these guys need to learn how to operate these complicated rolling stock to new signal configurations, and they're using our tools to do that. So the client, from the client point of view, I don't expect any of my clients are on this little webinar, unfortunately, is typically taking this one asset through the value chain and through the life cycle, including construction, augmented reality and virtual reality spaces. Or something's flashing at me around chats. Don't know if I'm meant to be answering. Here's another typical example. So in terms of approvals, there are a lot of neighbors. Here we are simulating as a little man. And there's a lot of questions around people, value their property. People, maybe spend $1 million on this house, and oof, here comes a 10-meter high viaduct, and maybe a bunch of people who you don't want looking into your backyard when you're trying to get a suntan or something like that. And we help facilitate these conversations with a level of confidence that creates comfort in the community. And we've transformed communities hugely from very negative to positive supporters of projects. Again, that gets these projects forward moving, gets the economies moving. And if anyone's in Victoria, you can see the popularity of the Premier there, and we've done maybe 20,000, 30,000 of these consultations to help facilitate this thing. And so we get a very, very positive response. And here we are going from the simulation into a bit of cell and a bit of your magic lighting there, Andrei, as well. So that's one example in this particular case, the level crossings rail environment, where we're bringing together lots of things, facilitating the economic development process. And this is quite timely, I guess, in COVID. Everyone's saying we've got to build our way out of this problem, which is probably a reasonable thing to say. Okay, so here we are doing a similar thing, and I'm running here a development model of Melbourne. This has been in train for quite a number of years, and I've got a little window going here. So this is all live modeling in real time, lots of data. And what I'm doing is I'm sort of demonstrating what life is going to be like from down on the street at the Victoria markets. You might recognize it, with various criteria in terms of this future development. Okay, so this is a conversation that might have taken a very long time, might have taken 6 or 12 months previously, and costs a lot of money for the property developer. And now we've been facilitating this type of conversation. It's a bit of a combination of very basic SketchUp. We try not to be a modeling tool. We've got people like Autodesk doing a good job there. We try to stay on the approval side of things and really bringing this together. But just by doing this process over and over again, and here we are, we've imported something probably from Revit, seems to be a tool of choice amongst architects, into this scenario. And perhaps before it goes to Andrei or Daniel or FloodSlicer there to render up the hero image, we need to make sure from all angles around the city and from down there on the street walking around the building itself, that it creates a great public space and is a great neighbour. It actually is providing value into the civil environment is really the fundamental principle that has worked, like I say, many times. Pretty much every major city every major building that you see in Victoria now, in Melbourne in particular, goes through this system. And here we are, for example, working now on a $16 billion metro rail project. So this is Melbourne Metro. And you can see in here, as I flick through, I'll just speed it up a little bit because it gets pretty slow, that what we have is a whole bunch of engineering project and data mixed in with various levels of detail of survey data, architectural data, and moving at a very high speed in terms of not just how fast the train is moving, but in terms of how fast the design is moving, and facilitating particularly what's called the reference design and the early design spaces in these worlds. And we require a lot of talent in our modelers, particularly to be able to read engineering and architectural drawings is very important. And so we don't get gaps like this over here, and the clients constantly changing their designs and things like this, of course. And this is a very large part of our work supporting, and then we will get various designs come in as options. And it's a process called optioneering, and even just negotiating with say the utilities companies here. You can see a whole bunch of information. They're very sensitive about this. Some of this information can be used for nefarious purposes, so they don't trust very many people with it. So facilitating that process of an integrator of a huge array of players, each with their own agendas, during a project that is in an evolutionary stage, and helping people make decisions around, what is the best result here? What is the best design? Politically, engineering, architecturally, efficiency. This is a height map, just sort of helping out with the design process there. Excuse me while I drink some peppermint tea and keep myself going. Right, so that's a typical process there, and you can actually see back a little bit where the utilities are clashing with the built environment here, with a particular station layout design concept. And that's high value piece to get in there at the right time, because anyone who knows has been in the design space, finding a problem early is about 100,000 times cheaper than finding it late, because design's very expensive, particularly as we get into the detailed design processes as things go forward. Okay, so 4 minutes left. So here's a typical example, and what's happening is we've got a city model, we've got an urban model, which is really our forte. We think we're the best in the world, actually, at running these big, complex urban models, particularly in this infrastructure, major project, urban planning space. You can see the cancer center here, for example, is another very, very complex project. And we're loading in here what's called point clouds, which are data captured from aeroplanes. And so you get this nice confirmation of accuracy, because of course, geometry is a very important piece in this. And the great thing is, for me, as being my doctorate's in city planning, as Mark said, is around this. You don't need to write a big document and talk to people about the problems. We are intuitive, we evolved spatially, we evolved in the African plains. I've got quite interest in evolutionary psychology. And so it makes it very easy for everybody to understand what's going on here and make good decisions and build better cities, which is really where it's all come from me. And just to finish off there, it's a little old now, this show reel, but taking that, because we work in this space, then there's often an engagement piece and help selling and explaining this to the community. So here's the same model you can see here, probably taken through V-Ray there, transformed into exactly as you're talking about, Samuel, construction sequencing processes. There's our scene from before, potentially on the Caulfield to Dandenong line. Bring in motion graphics. Here's another maze. So this is actually all Melbourne, these projects by the looks, through to the operator interface. There's a whole bunch of work we're doing now on major projects around Melbourne that are building to the next release of economic recovery and economic delivery to help move the nation forward and move these cities forward, all continuously utilizing and feeding off these urban model investments, right through to very technical signal sighting stuff. A lot of our work never sees the light of day. because it's all about bringing the people along in the background. And that is my time. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening.
Thank you, Ben. That was great. I'm just going to pinch the screen from you. Let's share this one. Okay. Next up, we've got Adam Walmsley. Adam is a civil infrastructure technical specialist at Autodesk. He focuses on enabling the industry to design, document, and construct civil infrastructure projects using improved connected workflows. His passion lies in using computational design processes to help automate and improve design. Prior to joining Autodesk in April 2019, Adam had worked for 12 years in the structural design and civil construction industry, holding lead digital engineering roles on challenging major projects in Australia. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Mark. I'm just going to share my screen. And I'm going to share this one. Can you see that?
You can.
Awesome. So thanks for joining us today, guys. So yeah, my name's Adam Walmsley. I work with Autodesk as a technical specialist covering everything around civil infrastructure. Today I'm going to talk to you about InfraWorks, which is a 3D modeling tool that we can use for civil infrastructure type of projects. High level agenda today, we're going to look at the infrastructure ecosystem, so the bunches of software that we can use in an infrastructure type environment. We'll talk a little bit about some of the factors driving change in the way that we design and detail and document and model our projects, and then why InfraWorks is such a good tool in connecting all of those dots together. So from an ecosystem perspective, inside of our AEC collection, there's a lot of tools, but the ones I'm going to talk about now are really useful together to move data from concept design all the way through to construction and even out into asset management. So we like to use Recap. For those that don't know, Recap is a tool that will open up point clouds. So people are capturing point cloud models from drones and things like that. Recap can combine all that data together. You can crop points out. You can make the points less dense, and then they can be used down the line in InfraWorks. And we'll get to more about InfraWorks soon. But from InfraWorks, from a concept perspective, being able to model lots of different types of infrastructure, you can then move out into Civil 3D and Revit. Sam spoke a little bit about Revit as a tool for architects, but it is also strongly used in the infrastructure space when modeling and detailing things like bridges, civil structures such as culverts and things like that, as well as vertical buildings. And we also have Civil 3D, which is really that workhorse for all things civil design. So taking drainage design, road design, land development, things like that, all the way through to construction. Drawings get created inside of Civil 3D, as do the 3D BIM objects, which are becoming quite mandatory on a lot of major projects these days. We then have BIM 360, which is our cloud product that kind of locks everything together, and it's that ecosystem that you can use to store all of the amounts of data on a project. So as an example, InfraWorks models can live in the cloud on BIM 360, as can Civil 3D models and Revit models, and it really enables people to work remote and be able to collaborate more effectively on projects. So let's talk a bit about some of the factors that are driving change in the industry. So one of them is some government mandates. So if you guys are across any of this, for example, the Transport for New South Wales Digital Engineering Framework is a series of documents that has been released to kind of stipulate how projects, especially infrastructure projects, will be delivered moving forward. Now, this is getting away from traditional delivery methods of just drawings and PDFs. We're now talking about 3D models and data getting into that asset maintenance phase of digital twins and things like that. And what Ben talked about sort of plays really nicely into the framework that the different states are starting to look at. So in Victoria, there's the VDAS, the Victorian Digital Asset Strategy. I also know TMR in Brisbane are doing some stuff, as is the Department of Main Roads in WA. Some other factors is just check technology as a whole and where we've come from to where we're going. So, you know, a long time ago, we started with CAD, taking people off the drawing board and digitizing it. Then we've moved into this BIM world where we're using these complicated 3D models to do clash detection and sort of, you know, remove any risk from projects early on. And then we're getting into the connected BIM phase, which is really leveraging the power of the cloud to help us do things that we couldn't have done in the past. This here is a picture of Civil 3D. And if you're a designer, you know, this is something that is very familiar to people. This is a contour, this is a surface, a ground surface. The red and yellow lines are contours. You've also got some strings in there for road alignments and things like that. And this is kind of the traditional way that we are used to working in the industry, very much looking at things from a 2D perspective only. Then from a delivery perspective, drawings are still the norm, and I think they will be the norm for a while. But you know, you're taking these complicated 3D designs, in this case, this is a road, and you are flattening it to a 2D PDF output. So we have a plan at the top, we've got a developed elevation at the bottom, and then you can see the different sort of characteristics of that design, such as the existing ground, the proposed road, and all of the design data that goes with that, such as the gradient and things like that. Now, when you are in the detailed design phase of projects, sometimes identifying issues can be a little bit challenging. As an example here, you've got the existing ground, we've got a proposed road, which is yellow, and then we've got this existing utility here, which is above the road. And, you know, trying to just visualize what this might look like in your head could be a little bit tricky. And then, you know, we have tools like InfraWorks that can sort of help visualize and provide greater context around these particular design issues. So InfraWorks can be used quite nicely to you know, have these discussions around a table with clients and with other subcontractors and designers to help work through some of these challenges that come up on projects. So why InfraWorks? So InfraWorks is a really light and fast tool for modeling conceptual designs in this GIS enabled space. So, you know, everything, it is important to mention that everything is GIS enabled in InfraWorks, so elements know where they are in relation to the rest of the world. But what is really important with InfraWorks is the amount of data that you can throw at it, I suppose, out of the box. So it handles 3D objects from DWG, as well as 2D information. It can take native civil 3D objects, whether that's road corridors or alignments, pipe networks, things like that. We can work with Revit models, we can work with DGN files, the IFC format, XML, what else do we have here? Shape files, SketchUp models, point clouds, and high resolution imagery. So just as an example, being able to take a high resolution GeoTIFF, in this case, this image that I have here was 6 gigabytes, and I thought it might completely crush the model, but it turns out InfraWorks handled it without much of an issue. And this is some of the context that you can see. So you've got the image on the left where some punks have been doing burnouts in the park. But then, you know, you look at the image on the right and you can see the bus stop signs on the road and even the oil stains. So having this context in this immersive environment when you are planning and proposing conceptual design it's really valuable. So from a modeling perspective in InfraWorks, you can model things such as roads, and there's a few different types of roads. Component roads have a little bit more substance, I suppose. You can tie them to design standards. So you're not just freeform modeling things, you're actually modeling in alignment with different design standards. You can model rail, things like that. From a structures perspective, you've got bridges, and tunnels, and you can also model some basic buildings. From a bridge perspective, it's worth mentioning that the Australian Super T girders come in InfraWorks, if that means anything to anybody on today's webinar. From a drainage perspective, you can model pipe networks, drainage networks, manholes, things like that. Also culverts, which is important. And then from a contextual perspective, you can start to add trees, and you can add waterways, easements of land, things like that. But apart from just being this 3D modeling tool, it is backed up with a lot of analysis. So as I mentioned, you're not just placing a road where you want it to go, you can actually optimize it, and you can view the design data that comes with that. So, when you are having these discussions with clients and other people about a road project, you can see that the design that you're proposing is actually backed up by the data. You're not just, building something like you're building something in The Sims. If you're modeling bridges, you can do some line girder analysis. You can output those reports and send that off to designers to refine it even further. I mean, again, it's a good tool to talk to someone to say, you want to try and model a bridge that's spanning 300 meters. InfraWorks will tell you that that's not going to happen. From a hydrology perspective, you can also even do some watershed type of analysis. So let's suggest you are going to put a road somewhere. You can see where the water runoff on that existing ground is going to impact that road, and in which case you can then place a culvert beneath the road or something like that. So whether people are using InfraWorks for road design or bridges, or using InfraWorks to extract linear features out of a point cloud. So in this case, they're pulling out the lane markings to go and do some down the line road rehabilitation type work, really popular work inside of local councils, or land development, or combining all of the different models we have together from different disciplines to start conceptualizing, I suppose, master planning or urban design type works. We have traffic simulation, even pedestrian movement. InfraWorks is this really great tool that you can use from a conceptual design perspective, and it's a really good enabler for downstream detailed design workflows where you would start to use Revit and Civil 3D. And then it also makes an appearance in the construction phase, because you could still use InfraWorks to contain all of the design data as it is designed. So you can almost use it as a repository to track the status of a project through design and into construction. So I'm going to finish up with a couple of examples of the ecosystem, I suppose, showing how a project can run from recap through to InfraWorks and then out through detailed design. So in this example here, we're going to start with recap. Someone has gone and flown a drone. They've taken a whole lot of aerial images from that drone, and we're going to use recap photo to combine them all together. So it's going to stitch all of the images together, controlling everything by some ground control points. And then you end up with this mesh, this very accurate 3D representation of all of those points that your drone's picked up. If you bring that into the InfraWorks environment, you can then layer that with the high resolution imagery, and pretty quickly you can get this really rich contextual sort of visualization of what your project's going to look like, or what your constraints might be. Trying to do this in a series of 2D drawings would just be nearly impossible. And being able to see some of the landscape that you might be up against when you are planning a project is it's super valuable. From there, after InfraWorks, you can then take that data out into the Civil 3D environment. Actually, before that, we're going to push it to the cloud. So this is BIM 360. So as I said, BIM 360 can store all this information, and people without the design tool experience can still navigate 3D models from a tablet or from a mobile device. And then, Civil 3D to finish it off. This is where you really get into the detailed design. So taking that concept design all the way through to being approved for construction. And this is where the analysis really comes into its own, where you're able to sharpen the pencil, so to speak, on some of these infrastructure design types of projects. And the last example I just want to talk about is a model of Paris. So this is a couple of images of a point cloud that has gone and captured an area of Paris. And then they've used InfraWorks to combine all of that data and recreate the existing conditions based off that point cloud, but I'm sure there's a whole lot of other data that's gone into that. They've also used InfraWorks to model some context. So in this place, putting some trees down to make things look quite nice. And the end result is, this really awesome, visually pleasing model of a great city. But it's also not just that. If you look at the video at the bottom, it is the analysis in the background. So they're doing traffic analysis. They're interrogating a T intersection, putting in a roundabout and seeing what impact that has on the traffic movement, as well as being able to track pedestrians and pedestrian movement around an existing asset. So with that sort of summarizes my very short 15 minutes today on InfraWorks, and yeah, why it's a really awesome tool and an important tool, I suppose, in connecting our infrastructure projects together from concept design through to construction. So with that, Mark, I will hand back to you.
Thank you very much. That was great. Let me steal your screen again. Okay. Next up, we have Daniel Flood. Daniel's a multi-award winning graduate of architecture at the University of Melbourne Architecture School. Daniel's developed a unique expertise in the animation of architecture and the creation of compelling virtual experiences. His pioneering work from the late 90s was instrumental in the growth of the visualization industry, establishing an artistic credibility for the then nascent technologies that eventually led to the co-founding of FloodSlicer. Published by both industry and academia, Daniel has lectured all over Australia. Amongst other notable works, in 2010, Daniel directed the creation of the WHEN component of the Australian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale of Architecture, whose focus was on the use of stereoscopic imagery in the reimagining of space, narrative, and geometry. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, everyone. It's interesting when you read that out. I haven't heard that for a while, but it's interesting. Love the word nascent, don't you? Anyway, so as you can tell, although I do notice there's someone going over some of the software again later, that we've managed to bookend, let's call it what I would describe as the sexy end of the 3D work at each end. And that's not because of how we look, can I just say very clearly. I don't know, you probably can't see me right now, which is lucky. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through this, just share the screen, which I've instantly forgotten how to do. Here we are. Okay, I'm assuming everyone can see that and hear it. Now, like a lot of these talks, I mean, this is probably one I normally give in 50 minutes, and I'm assuming everyone can see that. And so therefore it's a little bit difficult, so I'll rush through. So obviously, quite often with this talk, I'm especially in the association of Digistor, I think Digistor.
Sorry, Daniel, you're distorting really on your mic.
Am I?
Yeah. Try again.
Is it saying I'm short on bandwidth? Because it shouldn't be.
No, that's a bit better. It was just distorting briefly, very badly.
Well, unfortunately, that could lead to bad outcomes for the rest of this. But anyway.
No, that's good.
Okay, so just, I guess so everyone understands, I'm just going to go on a little bit of a tour of if this works. Just a brief chronology. And the reason why I think a chronology of the work that we do is quite important is a lot of the things we're talking about tools and technology and its application, is what do you do with it? And a lot of, I guess, the premise of, what I'm talking about is how do you take the tools you have and how do you make new things? And a chronology is a good way of sort of saying, well, look, what did we learn? Where did we go? So this is a brief chronology and I'm going to do it in rapid motion, i.e. one sentence each, because I really have not got much time. So first montage putting a building in about 1999. This is shot on tranny, filmed and photographed on film, and the building is dropped in 1999. First bit of propaganda to try and get this Western Shard in. Anyone that's been anywhere near this Shard, as it did end up like this, it got cut in half. First overseas project, around about 14 years ago, to sell this multi-award winning project. First ability in Australia to do a gloomy shot and sell off the plan, i.e. it's the first time we're allowed to be liberal with direction and artistry in relation to imagery. Didn't have to be blue skies. First constructed image out of hanging a boom and a camera out and looking out across and down Collins Street, again around about 14 years ago. Collaboration with brand company and other people who can give you ideas and allow you to get outside the box a bit as you work. First overseas iconographical image that is done using 3D technologies, and also, to be honest, the first V-Ray image that we did. First planning lie, let's call it that. This is all about how you sell a space, and the first time we're allowed to stick rain onto an image, all happening about 12 years ago. First bitsy montage that was put through by the company, as in what are the techniques and tools that create this. First holistic project that looked at colour palette and building architecture as a driving force of image colour and the way in which that we present information. We're now 10, 11 years ago. First alien invasion picture that I ever did. This is an image for that Venice Biennale that was mentioned earlier, that was done for John Wardle, who just won the Gold Medal of Architecture a couple of days ago, if you read about that. First Superman that everyone now thinks is normal for every project. This was the first time that ever appeared in the industry. This is done in multiple angles. Now it's the norm. I say this because image creation is not always straight out about suddenly putting a camera around. It's about how you use the pieces to create an outcome. This is about how you use view shots mixed with the building and think outside the box. Believe it or not, this is not something natural to people, this image. First detail that went out to market 9 years ago. First multi-shot, talent-driven, narrative-led, urban half way of presenting an image as opposed to just doing a standard picture of an entry. It's the half that the shopper goes to as opposed to the blue sky approach that you go through. First hyper-detailed, improved asset type image done about 5 years ago, where suddenly you had access to better trees, better bitmap, better outcomes. The vast improvement in most imagery is due to two things. One of the major ones being access to affordable assets. Let's say first kitsch over the top quasi, and then got us fired. Over the top use of a brand image, which taught us all a lesson. Just because it's called Aurora doesn't mean everyone thinks it looks good stuck on there. Next, first time I did a job with an International Academy Award winner. I'm not afraid of name dropping, so there she is. First time we did an image that became the hero shot of a project that had absolutely nothing to do with the building, really. I mean, you can just see a windowsill, and it became probably the best known image of that year. First drunk talent in a shot. First emulation of a photo shoot of my original mentor, some would say, John Gollings, which was this idea of this tallest building in Australia, which has been surpassed now, or being built now, is the idea of emulating an old photographic hero. First full snow simulation that was used throughout an entire project, and in Japan. First time we had to, let's say, distort the views in relation and get away with it. And first time we got asked to copy Corona and did so. So what's the mission, I think, of ArchViz? The mission for ArchViz is we make stuff. We want to build respectability and credibility in ArchViz. What I want to do, that is the mission that we have as I see it. Mostly so we can make better stuff. The credibility is about getting trust. It's because it's bizarrely undervalued in the market. We are underpaid, underappreciated, and underrepresented in the way in which this industry operates. And that is very telling and obvious as we speak right now. And because the stuff you make is just about as good as the people paying for it will let you become. As we all know, as everyone questions, say, lockdown laws or whatever else is going on out there, the idea that the expert is somehow an expert is contrary to most people's way of seeing the world these days. So the idea that somehow the professional photographer, and I'm saying within the industry itself, the idea that the expert within the industry itself is somehow trained to a point of actually understanding an outcome better than potentially the person paying for it is not something that people are used to anymore. And so part of that is about creating the idea of trust in your expertise that becomes difficult the less you know about the products that you're selling, in a sense, in this case, architecture and location. This is so they believe you when you tell them this is the best way of doing it. And often that is the usual issue we have, is that people think they know better. Now, sometimes they might, and that doesn't mean you don't listen. Sometimes that is what this is all about. So probably touching a bit on what Andrei said earlier on, I'm not going to go through composition and all those sorts of elements. I think that's sort of implicit in relation to how it is that you make an image, and that is what it is. When it comes down to the idea of storytelling, I don't see storytelling as inherent in every picture. Storytelling is about how things link together, and often the narrative or the way that you're working is about the thing you're looking at. So when I'll culminate this particular talk, we'll be covering over, I guess, what is something that I would say is anti-narrative. And often when you're looking through a lot of the work they're doing, sometimes creating a sense of something is as powerful as creating a sense of story. But back to this, there's no such thing as CGI. So I've tried to do a Hoyne style trademark of place visioning by saying this word, HGI is my word. And I think this rolls back to the idea that the human in charge is the person in charge. So there's no such thing as CGI. So I refer to them as HGIs, and let's hope it stays that way. I mean, I think at the end of the day, part of the issue with where software and technology is going is that becomes eroded. The idea of the human-generated image gets eroded. So my point being is this, and I also maybe make this point when I look at this, is no one ever says it took less than a second to take a photograph. And I say that because the way in which this industry seems to work is the easier it gets to the point where you can generate an outcome through whatever means that you show, in effect gets undercuts the value, I guess, in relation to how other people see it. So what I mean by that is that if you can then generate a series of stills out of a video, then the value of those stills seems to be treated as a less valuable product. It lends back to its issue that this industry is undervalued, and the way in which that we make stills and those sorts of elements are really sort of caught in this sort of back and forwards of who's in charge and who's in control. What's the value? So this is a camera generated image. That's a CGI. That did not take 2 seconds. Someone had to go, and as per the quote we heard, someone had to stand in the right place, but they didn't just have to stand in the right place. They had to do all those things simultaneously and build a narrative at the base. I say this is a CGI. So what is the tool there? Hence we have another camera generated image with a CG component that's put in there. The decision making about where we stood and where this Skidmore's Merrill building was placed in relation to, you know, found objects like this person standing on the side, or the way in which motion and movement works within creating a sense of activity in the front. But at the same time on this street, which is on King Street that people know in Melbourne, it's also known as the brothel, you know, the stripper street, and the way in which the narrative tells the story here is all about motion and excitement. And this is a Conte generated image drawn in the 30s. So I guess my point in all this sort of stuff is your tools create the image and your tools create the content, which is in our game. And I am specifically talking about our game, which is about generating, let's say, I always used to use the term utopian notions of the future as this sort of airbrushed idea of what the future will look like, is different ways. So what I'm saying is that most people look at each image as a strive for an archetype. You're trying to create that image that everyone will remember, at least one out of that project. Some of the best known archivists people like Amir or whatever, effectively just make archetypes. They effectively they look at the idea of creating a hero image that is being used, whereas what our job is to create that archetype, but also look at revealing the product and showing probably more technically similar to, say, Ben's work and others in relation to that. Not only do we have to show this sexy side of things, we also have to, you know, give the elements that actually have the value in them, which is what does your bathroom look like, or what does your living room look like? So what I'm mostly saying is we should be looking for in the use of tools to help create a project style over a studio style. And one of the issues, as I'll touch on briefly in a minute, is the way tools override the ability of the human to actually do the work in an effective way. Is becoming one touch in some ways, which is without the backing information and an ability to actually bend the rules. Bend, the idea is where you have the ability to take new tools and old tools and actually, and then make new things out of it, but don't get caught in the aesthetic that is driven by the engines that you're using or the methods you're using. So just to quickly, here's a series of images set up like a Instagram of Hugh Ferris's Conte work in the 30s. This is some watercolor work by Edgley in the late 90s. There was a style of illustration at that point, and as computer generated outcomes, we have the ability to create this. This is just stripped out of ours, which is multi-paletted, multi-directional, multicolored, and multi-storied. And that is the benefit of the work, the way we do it. So how am I going for time? It must be short. So going through this in style archetype is that what I wanted to cover on all this is, I'm going to just skip over some things because I'm running too slowly. We'll let that run actually. Can you tell me if this plays? Okay. I think you're having trouble watching that, so I'll just watch it this way. I'll pause that here, and I guess what I was trying to say is people love cars, and they approach it to similar to the image we saw earlier. So tools are brains, computer, various CAD Max rendering engines, Veronex, Corona, Unreal, Railclone, Forest Back Finisher. I can list these on, and a topic in this motion about what things you use is effectively saying, well, there's a topic in and of itself in every one of these areas. So what I thought I'd say from that point of view is who's in control of those tools. New tools bring serendipity. They bring accident outcomes. They bring something that creates new outcomes and new thought processes in what you're doing. At the same time, it doesn't bring informed choices. So often what it is play with your toys, but realize that the way in which you need to get a mastery of those before you start saying that they're controlling the aesthetic outcome that you're dealing with. And a lot of that element is why I would then talk about the idea of whether or not it's a good way of working. Experienced users need to get out of the box. They need to get their head out of the sand, and they need to realize when what they're using is out of date and not working. That is a very difficult thing to do, all for the reasons of what happens above there. So all of us need to sort of look at the tools and see how we can improve. Just so I show some things, this is stereo outcome. What I'm saying is that we've always investigated the idea of technology and how you deliver information. This is creating a stereo film on a screen in an exhibition space 10 years ago. And of that, the idea is before there was any standardized stereo delivery mechanisms, we had to sort of custom work our way through this. And the whole studio worked on this for a good solid 4 months. Tools. Just thought I'd just say, as we know, everything we do in the thought process is technically there. I've just got a couple of screen grabs of the process whereby we built this fan image in terms of the way in which we simulated these elements, and then thought, well, how do we apply that into a story that we make? There's how is the sound? So how do we inform storytelling in the form of a project? That is the skill of being highly technical focus at the same time as being creative. But why don't sort of job? I think it's quite important. Why do I have a job? Because I can tell you that if everyone actually applied themselves to sort of the AI approaches and one-touch outcomes, really the way in which you can, I think I did an analysis on bathroom renders, and I think there was 12 seminal images that could be done. So from that sort of element there, you can program any AI to achieve that. And what I would say from that is that when is that going to change? And what it is about is actually about who's developing the software and targeting. What are they targeting? Now you can see in terms of the other presenters that have just followed that a lot of that talk is about sort of there's broader focus than just what we're doing, which is about representation and creating spaces and visual and just sexy creating spaces. There's other aspects, which is the focal point of what the BIM element is. But at the same time, if that BIM thing was focused on what we are doing, then you'll probably find one-touch outcomes in terms of that rendering we're watching coming out of, say, Navisworks. And by the way, having seen Navisworks' ability to do that, having watched a presentation 2 years ago, it was sort of that is a big change as far as my understanding of how it works. And so often when you're seeing that sort of stuff, I'm expecting those self-generators to come through and take over. And is that a problem? Well, it is, in the sense that what are our jobs going to be at the end of it? How are we going to, control the type of work we're doing? And I would say overall that we sort of need to sort of be aware of the fact that all of the beneficial works of creating a reality, for example, is actually being created to, I guess, speed up or make it more accessible. And what I mean by accessibility is that accessibility means that a person with not much experience or training can then pick up and get to a mid-level or a high level. And that is the benefit, I guess, of making it more accessible, and therefore make more money for the people building the software. More people can use it. That's the fundamental reason for it. Our reasoning things is we need flexibility to create different outcomes. But the fact of the matter is that what it affects if people just get an outcome easily is that they never get the background training to actually, I guess, take that new tool and turn it into, I think, you could probably argue that the whole way down the line. I mean, I built my first website writing straight out an HTML code into a notepad. Anyway, just going to finish on this. I'm going to send you a link if you can just quickly watch this. Sorry, not that. I'm just going to go back to the chat. Can't find the chat. So I'm just going to send you a similar to what Andrei did earlier. And I just want to watch what I've been sneakily showing you through this whole thing is bits of this. If you can all see that I've just sent out there, that Vimeo link. You can just quickly watch that.
I don't think we see it in the chat window yet, Daniel.
It's there.
Oh, I see, yep.
Is it broken, is it? Okay.
Yeah, that link is not working.
Linked. Oh my God. Sorry, I can tell you. Sorry, 1 second. I think we made it invisible to, let's see if I can turn it on.
You want to come back to it?
Yeah, what time do I run out of time? Sorry, I've lost track.
We're about 5 minutes behind.
Behind, that's what I thought. So I'm trying to get it over and done with.
But we can do it in the Q&A.
Yeah, it's just that it's sort of my big ending. So let it roll, because it sort of explains sort of some of those things. And yes, I can do a Q&A later.
Yep, up to you.
Yep, it's about to be done right now. Sorry, I'm just getting someone to actually make it live while I'm talking to you. So it's just a second. Sorry. After all those dress rehearsals and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
It's working now?
Yep. Can I suggest turning the sound up? And I will say one thing while it starts, if you can hear me up there, this was designed to be put into a 6x6 meter black room and as a part of a suite of a strategy of videos. So this one's the abstract one, and then more of an art piece, and then there are more, let's say, explanatory videos that explain the project after. If someone can tell me when it's sort of done, that would be great. Okay, I think most people will be about to finish or finished. What I just wanted to say, in the end, the reason why I like showing this particular piece is because it brings together the various parts of the company to go on in terms of when you create these pieces and it's all in-house. The ability to sort of integrate different types of technology, 3D, film, and all the elements that make up this is effectively something that is not creatable through a multi-pass process through other outside sources. So this is sort of a project of pleasure, I guess we all had last year. And from the point of view of where it gets to, we hope that people sort of appreciate it for what it is, which is, you know, effectively working through the technology we have and trying to create a different sort of outcome that is not, I guess what we should say is reading exactly as per what you would expect a commercial video to be. In a sense, it's no different from creating that first interior detail before anyone was willing to pay for them. You had to go out and make something to make things possible. Getting Phoenix or any sort of physical simulation work into ArchViz is effectively a holy grail, very difficult to do because it's expensive and clients don't understand it on the way through. So that's it. So hopefully that's has everyone seen it?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Sorry, that was a bit rushed. I probably overstuffed my presentation, but let's. From that, I hopefully asked a few questions that people might, or posed a few questions that people might want to help me answer. So there we go.
Thank you, Daniel. We've got some time for a Q&A panel at the end as well. So hopefully we'll be able to have some time at the end for that. Just let me move on. We now have, so let me get my screen together here. Next up, we've got David Zwierzchaczewski from Autodesk. I think David wins the prize for absolutely the smiliest profile photo of any of our presenters so far. David's the animation specialist for media and entertainment in ANZ and APAC. He's been with Autodesk for 8 years, where he's part of the 3ds Max, Maya and Motion Builder beta teams, as well as the general technical specialist for media and entertainment pipelines and software solutions. Before starting at Autodesk, David had worked in the film, TV and computer games industries, working for various studios such as Disney, 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, Rockstar and Sega. He has an in-depth understanding of how these industry sectors work and the crossover with software workflows. So welcome, David.
Thanks, Mark. So a couple of weeks ago, Max 2021 came out, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to actually show some of the features. I was a little bit concerned about doing a live demo and streaming it. So what I've done is I've actually put a video together. The video goes for about 15 minutes with a focus on viewport, rendering, textures, a lot of the new features that are in 2021, but a little bit of a shift towards viewport and rendering, excuse me, features. After the video, I think we'll move straight into Q&A. Is that right, Mark?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And we'll do that. I'm also thinking I might do a quick demo as well, a live demo, just based off one of the QA questions as well. So once this video finishes, I'll do maybe a 5-minute demo as well. Better actually share my screen first.
Hey everyone, my name's Zwierzchaczewski, animation specialist for Autodesk. Going to be looking at Max 2021 and having a look at some of the new features in rendering and the viewport. In 2021, you'll notice that all the defaults are new, everything's changed around, and you will be presented with this new pop-up window when you first open Max. And when you open up the material editor, you'll notice it will come pre-populated with these new physical materials. And this will work in all renderers and has a really nice look in the viewport. And as you can see, there are a bunch of really cool presets already set up here. So you can just click on any of these presets and it'll pretty much get you 99% of the way there. So as you can see here, I've selected gold and that's looking pretty good. If you're using SME, it doesn't come pre-populated. But if you pick something like, for example here, the double-side material, you'll now find physical materials are pre-filling it. And the physical materials UI has been written in Qt, which is making it a heap faster to run. And the other big change you'll notice is that Arnold is now the default renderer. So Arnold is a modern ray tracer, unlike the old scanline renderer. And it's just a fast, accurate, physically based renderer. And as you can see here, we're getting what I like to call texture parity or viewport parity. What we're seeing in viewport is very close, if not exactly the same as what we're seeing in render here. And when running active shade like here, you can see we're getting a nice active view of moving stuff around in the viewport, and that showing up in real time or near real time in the renderer. And it works with the in viewport active shade too. So this is where we're working directly with the renderer itself. I really do love how easy it is to render with Arnold. And as you can see, this particular example rendered in 22 seconds. So we're just going to compare that to the old scanline renderer and see how long that takes. And this video has just been sped up heaps. So, you know, we don't have to wait half a day to see the render come out. But it's still taking a while just to even sped up as much as it is. And as you can see, the scanline rendering took a lot longer, and it doesn't do the materials and the textures, the shading or the shadows accurately either. And if you want your Max to behave the old way, just go up to the defaults and choose Max Legacy, and you'll get the old Max Legacy setup. So a lot of work has also been put into the viewport and looks quite amazing. Here we've got this really cool mech looking thing, and this is sitting at about 21 million polygons. And you can see here all the really nice shadow effects that we're getting with the progressive skylight that's in the viewport. If you don't like the progressive skylight rendering effect, you can actually turn this off. I know some people find it annoying, and depending on your scene, you know, there could be a bit of a delay in that progressive rendering. So it's easy enough, if you don't like it, to turn it off. You know, picking another environment just so you can see the difference that it shows on the geo. So you don't get the shadows. So it's kind of like, you know, turning shadow casting off. So we've done some really good improvements with ambient occlusion. And if we just select ambient occlusion here, you see we get really nice shadowing happening on the object, but we don't get the flickering like we were getting with the progressive shadows. So the algorithm for AO in 2020 was older, obviously, not as good. It's been completely rewritten for 2021 and just gives you such a much better result than what we were getting in 2020. So we've also included a really cool HDRI environment shader. And as you can see here, we've got a whole bunch of settings that we can play with. Rotation, height, tilt, on the X and the Y, exposure. We can play with the contrast as well, clamping, although you're not really seeing the effect of that in this example here. We can also do background blur and change the amount on the blur of the background. So by clicking ground projection, it basically puts a ground plane on the object, which helps to bed your object in that 3D space using that HDR. So we can change what the background looks like. You can see that ground projection works on any of the backgrounds here. And I just love the flexibility here. We can tweak the colors, the tint, the exposure, just, really set a great mood that we want our robot to look like, and the environment that we want him to be in. And yeah, with a few changes of the parameters, we've got a really lovely sunset look, and we still haven't actually hit the render button yet. So this astronaut model was downloaded from TurboSquid, and the PBRs have been slightly tweaked to work in this example. So if we compare the renderer to the viewport, you'll notice that the camera on the top of his head here, the reflection of the camera in the chrome in his helmet is not being reflected essentially in viewport, but is being reflected in render. And that's essentially the only real difference we're seeing. We're actually seeing the reflections in the visor and off the chrome, but that chrome on chrome reflection we're not seeing. So we've just added some motion capture to this model. I have no idea what this is. I'm trying to work it out. It's maybe something football related, or maybe him getting shot. I have no idea. But anyway, it's super easy to drop that mocap on this rig. So I've selected a cinematic camera, and what I'm doing now is just going through and changing some tints and contrast, and just having a look, playing with basically the look dev, and seeing what my actual rendered camera, what it will see when I hit the render button without me having to waste time hitting the render button. So if we stop on a frame, it doesn't matter, any frame, we can look around and see the rest of the 3D environment that we're in and make choices here. We might decide that this camera is not quite right, this framing's not quite right. Maybe we want to go to a 2-camera setup or a 3-camera setup, whatever. The point here is that you've got so much more flexibility and information here so that you can make choices earlier on. Since the physical material rendering is very similar to what a game engine does, we can use materials that are intended for game engines and they will look the same. And we've created 2 specific materials exactly for that. And you can see here we've got the metal roughness and spec gloss. So if you want to use this, you can go to a site like this, which is free PBR, and scroll through. There's heaps to choose from. Pick out something that takes your fancy and simply just download the files. Just make sure you've got an environment in your scene. This is important for reflections. Now just take the PBR metal roughness and apply it to your object. Then drag and drop your textures in. And as you can see, we very quickly build up that shader, and very quickly we're done. And this really does give you that texture parity of what you'll see in engine, and if we hit the render button, what we'll see in render as well. So continuing on the mindset of look deving with the viewport, we have another cool feature with this OSL shader. So we've got this Buddha statue which is lit with the environment, But what we're going to do here is tone down the environment and drop in a shader called HDRI lights and connect it to the additional light inputs of the environment. And you can see if I push this button here, I've got a point helper so I can actually move the light around and direct where it's coming from. You can see here I can select the old max place highlight and select on the object where I want that highlight to be. And if we zoom in, you'll see the reflection of this umbrella light that's been selected. And we can change the size of the light, the exposure, the tint. And if you check this little box, it'll actually make it visible in the camera as well. And that can be helpful when you're trying to place lights or get an idea of where lighting is or objects, relationship, etc. And what I love about this is you can do your lighting design in the viewport without having to hit the render button. And just keep in mind that these aren't actually lights, they're pictures of lights. And you can see the renderer on the right will create a shadow correctly, depending on where the light is in relationship to the object. But in the viewport, we're not actually seeing that shadow. But that's because we've got progressive skylight off. So if we click that back on, you can see now in the viewport, we're getting those shadows. But as you can see, like I was saying earlier, with progressive skylights on, we get that flickering in the viewport. So this is, just a personal choice. If you don't like that flickering, turn it off, but you don't get the shadows in viewport. If you're not phased by too much by that flickering, then turn it on and you will see the shadows in the viewport. And we've got a nice little slider where you can set the fade in of that effect. So it can fade in a lot slower, or it can just almost pop in. Again, personal choice. You might find that popping in works better, or a very slow fade in works better for you. There's been some general improvements in the OSL shaders. First, we've changed the categorization a little bit because it was getting a bit unruly, and we're now sitting at 126 maps. So for instance, the math groups are one level higher instead of being nested. And this was actually a user request. And the UI can be dynamic, as you can see here. We can add and remove. And some of the shaders will have a custom built UI. This is all Qt. And as you can see, this curve shader gives you so much flexibility and customization. We can change so many of the light function features with these curves, and you've got an instant sort of feedback that's happening here. So you can see we're doing for instance, like a color correction. Let's put more pink in, let's put more blue in, whatever you want. And we can also change the brightness, the contrast, and the color as well. And if we select color, we can change the hue, tint, saturation, so forth. You can spend hours playing with this if you're not careful. We can even make the effect only happen on a certain hue. So we can use the teardrop to select, say, a certain color, hue, range, and that effect that we choose will only happen on that area. And here we've got some camera projection shaders. You can see the map is being projected onto the object, or we can make it project through the object. It also works with any type of camera as well. We can add cameras to it. So you can see here we're changing the field of view, and this follows with the camera. And you can see here the aspect ratio can be changed. And we've also got an object projector where we can pick an object, not a camera, and it'll project off the face of that object. So it's not a perspective projection like you're seeing with the cameras. It's projecting off the face, so off the XYZ of this cube. And of course this works with scaling. So if we scale the object, then the plane scales as well. And finally, we've got a spherical projection as well. So if we pick the cube here with a spherical projection, you see that round spherical projection off that cube. And finally, let's have a look at some procedural noise. So we've got this Uber noise shader, which has a ton of different noise types in it. And I highly recommend just getting it and playing with it, because it's great and a lot of fun. As you can see, you've got functionality and all the variables here, so you can change the fractal, displacement, you name it, you can change it. And here it is working as a bump map to give it wrinkles and distortion. So that was a quick look at the new features in 3D Studio Max 2021. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.
Okay, so one of the questions in the QA session was from Sam's presentation, and it was actually about the software that Sam was showing. So Sam, if you could get a list up of maybe the software you had. What I wanted to show, because there was actually two questions about PixLR, and PixLR, I was actually at Autodesk for a couple of years before I even knew PixLR existed. It's a bit of a hidden gem, actually. It is free to use. It's web-based, and it's essentially a photo editor. So if you want to use it, I'll just leave this up for a second. Just copy this link here. I did actually copy and paste the link into, I think, the chat window, so you can get it there. Yeah, and all I want to do is just show you what it looks like. So basically, you open up, or you go to the website, click on PixLR X, and you can see this is essentially what you're presented with here. Let me just move. I've got a lot of things going on here. Open image. I'm just going to go into my pictures folder. Let's open up some image of breakdance. I actually watched this film for the first time in like 30 years. It's really, really bad, but I couldn't look away. I just wanted to sort of walk you through the UI here. What you've got is a lot of functionality that you will see in Photoshop, but of course, you know, you're not going to get every sort of button and every sort of feature that you get in Photoshop. So, you know, you can paint in it. You've got your layers sitting up here. You can crop your image. You can resize your image. You can do, they've got this liquify, which I remember when it came out in Photoshop, I was kind of blown away by. It's really great for manipulating those images. You can do color grading, you know, smoothing out, all of that sort of stuff. So it's actually a really good tool if you're just doing, say, UV mapping or some basic photo manipulation. I highly recommend having a play with this. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And I think we'll move on to some QA questions.
Yeah, thanks, David. Just let me move on to, I'll just put a screen share up. Yep, so thank you to all our presenters that we've had today and so far. That's been fantastic. We've run a little bit over, but we do have some time to answer any questions that have been outstanding from the preceding sessions and any new questions you might have. If you'd like to ask a question, please type it into the Q&A panel. And if you'd like to address it to a specific panelist, by all means, put their name in the question too. We have, there's a question there, David, you might see from Simon Finger. Do you want to read that out and respond to that one?
I'm a little bit confused by the emphasis on integrating Arnold into Max. I can't talk for everyone, but it doesn't seem like much of a draw card for users of Corona, V-Ray. I assume it would just be an inflated install for users not using Arnold. Not quite sure how to answer that. Look, I think you know, there's pros and cons with every renderer, and you know, I actually want to take a step away from that question a little bit, in the sense that I would say real-time rendering is probably another thing, you know, to look at as well, and you know, so I kind of think in some ways it's a little bit of a personal choice. There's been a lot of work that's happened with Arnold to get the sort of physical based stuff happening, to get the, like I was showing, texture parity or render parity happening. There's been a lot of speed performances that have been done with it, and GPU as well. So yeah, you know, it's a bit of a, when talking about renderers, it can be a little bit of a personal choice. So I don't specifically want to go into specifics about why one's better than the other. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how really to answer that question.
Okay. It sounds like one that will take a longer conversation.
Yeah. I think what part of that is about is actually the question of what are you adding into new packages, and given that sort of, I mean, Corona's sort of taken over the ArchViz section over a period of years by dropping in different ray tracing methodologies into Max, and then upselling that as a sort of you know, that's why we pay all of our subscriptions. That's why we're doing it. Is what is the actual benefit for this particular, maybe that particular question we're talking about ArchViz, because anyone says Corona is ArchViz, so let's face it, or V-Ray. So maybe the question's more tied to, it seems like an addition that looks like you're value adding, but in actual fact, what have you added that is sort of going to increase or improve the users of Corona? Because you're focusing pretty much on a new ray tracer in that presentation.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess
Simon here has just said, yes, he'd rather put more emphasis on UI improvement for workflows rather than renderers. I mean, look, it's specific. You can only show certain things in the time you have. And I personally think it's good that you've got a different alternative in there that you could work with. But I understand the question.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, well, look, I think Autodesk was probably a little bit late to the game with, you know, what renderer we were going to use, and that support. So I think, you know, there's a little bit of catch up that's happening right now.
Would you say, I mean, just a credit, I would say that that's almost been continual, because, you know, Mental Ray comes in and then that gets absorbed into the system and effectively gets rejected in favor of V-Ray, and then you go through a process. And I've actually asked continually of Autodesk over a number of years, why is it that you don't, and, you know, that probably ties back to also some of the other elements that people would want to see, which is, instead of us outlaying massive, you know, things for things like deadline and other types of things, why it effectively got written out of Max as a process of the render manager and those sorts of things. So when you're actually targeting what is it that you're not focused on, which is render engines, it does seem a little bit like you are suddenly, and say you missed the boat, but I'd probably say you've had a couple of goes, and whether or not you back the right horse is possibly the issue. Is that fair enough?
That's a fair comment, yeah. And again, I'm not 100% sure how to answer that. I think that, you know, that in itself could be an hour-long conversation. So Yeah, look, I'm not 100% sure how to really answer that one.
But this does, I mean, I will say clearly that is a marked improvement in relation to the real-time aspect, in relation to how does that then work into the workflows of, you know, whether it be linear workflows that we all work on down the line, or the way the Corona seems to work, which is sort of self, you know, effectively renders it for you based on stuff similar to the sorts of things you're talking about. And how much is HDRI playing a role in the way ArchViz is working relative to, I guess, the standard Sky setups that are now vastly improved on what they were 5 years ago. So I think there's always a place for it. It's actually possibly quality of HDRI as well is usually the issue. Whether you set one up in this scene's fine. And the way you have access to those assets and trust of, you know, that type of imagery, you know, at various levels of quality can affect what you're showing us to. And I think that's not understood. Like many of the old HDRIs that people use are full of red in the actual processing of the HDRI outcomes, and you end up getting this flush of flat red across everything, and people tend to end up, you can tell almost who's using which HDRI package based on the way this is automatically lighting. And whereas, say, what Corona brought in was a much higher quality of thought process on the quality of the skylight that was working in there. So either way, look, I mean, it's not saying I'd rather see this stuff embedded into the process, and I applaud the effort, to be honest. I'm separate to that, but I do think we need to make sure that that we are getting those improvements, the UI improvements out of it. So the cloud-based rendering versus specific rendering, you know, helping the local rendering elements that exist as well is something that I think possibly could do with a bit of focus on. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it is a moving target as well. So, and it's a fast moving target as well. So, look, one thing, you know, first thing I'll say is I don't have all the answers, and Autodesk doesn't have all the answers to these questions and to all the questions here. But one thing that I will say is I really encourage people to get engaged with us and get engaged with the development team. You know, that's, if you have issues, if you have concerns, or if you have improvements, you know, get engaged. You know, part of my job is to help that communication flow from customer to developer and back again. So we're very open to hearing that feedback, and we encourage that, you know, and we don't just want to hear the good things. We want to hear the bad things as well. So you've got my contact details. If you have specific things, please, you know, get in touch with me, and I'm more than happy to help feed that through to the development team.
Thanks, David. We've got a couple of other questions, maybe a more general one rather than a technology one. Patrina asks, how do you see the role of these available tools in selling real estate going forward with this COVID-19 thing? Do you see mass adoption at a marketing level? So I guess that's a question for those people out there doing development of these projects. Any comments on that?
I mean, I think most of these things are at I guess, being used as, most of these things are being used already, whether or not you're saying these new tools. I mean, most of those tools we're talking about there are established ones across the presentations. In relation to, you know, I mean, everything we do is about marketing, and I guess the actual possible question in relation to how it's being used is there going to be any change at the back end of this particular process? Australia is in a very specific position in relation to how we're going to pan out the back end of this, and I've noticed from comments here, there's a number of people here in Australia asking some questions. So from the point of view of where we sit, where we feel like we've brought it under control to some extent, and how we're going to come out of that, and then we're going to get facial contact, is how does this work internationally as well? One big benefit of this industry of us, and Andrei will affirm this, is that we are an exporter, which is actually quite rare in Australia. The fact that we do work that is in and out, and how does that affect our ability if people start to accept remote working and remote type of products or marketing products, whether the real-time stuff. I mean, what's interesting in this particular presentation is, whilst we've got real-time things that, say, Ben has talked about, it's not that sort of unreal level of photoreal approach that will give the VR outcomes. And is this going to improve that? I don't know. But at the end of the day, your delivery mechanism is, you know, through things that you touch and you hold. There's very little, except from the screen you're looking at, the phone that you're holding yourself, that is not specifically a screen that is touchable and tangible. So I think keeping in mind that all these tools are things that you use, and maybe that's the premise of what I was trying to say, which is everything is usable in marketing. It's just how you interpret the requirements of your audience. And that knowledge is probably left out by all of us who really do the marketing type imagery at a whole level, is understanding your target audience. And your target audience just shifted most likely.
Thanks, Daniel. Any other comments from any other panelists? Just about run out of time.
I have a comment.
Yes, Andrei.
Okay, just quickly, just pick up what Daniel's saying. I think, you know, so much of the focus of these kind of some of the more interactive stuff has been around the sales center up to now. And now that the sales center is less accessible and potentially will be kind of disrupted going forward, the emphasis is about streaming high quality photoreal, you know, high res stuff into your handheld device, into your, you know, your essentially like not super high spec hardware type environment. So the more, I think there might potentially be investment for, I'm hearing some things like Unreal might be doing, where you know, there's investment going into like kind of streaming, like Netflix sort of style stuff, where you can stream high quality content instantly into people's device. I think that will make a big shift, because at the end of the day, you know, we couldn't even show our video now without sending links.
Oh, well,
That's,
you know, I do this for a living and I can't even get it to play. So what can I say?
yeah, exactly. So in other words, that kind of thing that we just did now, if Daniel and I could be showing our, you know, marketing level, sexy looking content in high res with no issues, that would be a kind of a change. And I would imagine there will be more demand from the market around content being delivered that way. And if the infrastructure is there for that to be delivered at that quality, then the kind of work we produce will follow.
Okay, thanks, Andrei. We might leave it there. We're just about out of time. So if there are a few other questions, but we'll try and get back to you personally via email or phone call after the end of this session. I want to thank you all for joining our virtual conference today. I hope you really enjoyed it. A big thank you to all of our presenters. Thank you, thank you. You were fabulous. As a reminder, you can see Digistor's contact details on the screen there, so please don't hesitate to contact us or me personally for any questions. I can also forward questions to our presenters if you need it. As I mentioned, the conference was recorded, and we'll be emailing a link to the recording to all registrants in the coming days. That's it for now. We look forward to hearing from you soon. I'll be closing off the conference now. Thank you and farewell.
Well done, Mark.